Hey, how you doing, girl? It's Miguel. So today is the 3rd of June, and the uh, boy, I tell you, I'm really loving these long days. The sun is up early, it's bright, and when the sun doesn't go down, I mean, the twilights last for a long, long time. And so at nighttime, it's like 8:30, maybe even 9 o'clock. You can still see remnants of the sun's light, which is amazing. I just love that part of the day, the edges of the day. And I'm so glad that I'm seeing lightness all around, in the beginning and the end of the day. I don't know, there's something about the light, how it makes things possible. When it's dark, I just want to come on home and, sit down or lay down or meditate or do something indoors. But when the sun's out, I really feel like there's a lot of possibility out there. Like I could be out there doing stuff, whether it's like going to a park or traveling somewhere. It's just inviting. The light of the day is an invitation to do something new, to do something interesting. And it really is a wonderful thing having lots of light. You know, I think in the tropical regions, days don't vary as much. The length of the day doesn't vary as much. And that might be nice. um, I guess I'm guessing they're like 12-hour days every single day of the year. And I wonder what that would be like. I wonder what it's like to have these ultra long days. Well, here's the thing. When you're up at higher latitudes, you get these changes during the seasons. And, it's just a fact of life. Anyway, I do like the light. I kind of wish it was bright all the time because it's easy to block out the light, but it's hard to create new light. Yeah, if it were like bright 24/7, that would be pretty amazing. Anytime you step out the door, I can imagine it. Anytime one would step out the door, they would be confronted with lots of light. But alas, that is not the case. Unless, of course, perhaps if we had two suns, now that would be interesting. In a way, we kind of do have two suns now that I think about it, with the moon. Though the moon, of course, does not produce any light of its own, it merely reflects the sun's light. In a way, it is a light source, even if it is just reflected light. Pretty amazing. I don't know. I contemplate life on this planet and life in general, and I'm just blown away by it. The fact that I can even speak about there being a planet Earth and there being a moon and there being a sun, I mean, that is just phenomenal. I know. So today I wanted to talk a little bit about thinking and doing. And right now, about that subject of thinking and doing, I'm thinking that might be all there is. There's just thinking and there's doing, at least from a human subjective experience. I'm really blown away about how human beings have such a range of thinking and doing. I mean, our brains are amazing and we can contemplate infinity upon infinity of ideas. Incredible complexity and incredible breadth to our imagination. And not only that, not only are we extremely talented when it comes to thinking, we're so creative and We love taking our imagination to the edge. But we're also amazing at doing. Everything we do, like, say, preparing a meal in the kitchen, that's all about doing. And it really is phenomenal. The precision we have in laying out the food on the cutting board and slicing the carrots, say, and then sautéing them in a pan. We're so accurate in terms of our time and movement that for us, making a meal is no big deal, but really it is an amazing feat of doing. Human beings, we play games like basketball and football and other sports, and it's amazing feats of doing. Even driving a car, like yesterday I drove for really about 3 hours, I think, total. And it might have been a little bit more, but something that I almost take for granted is basically a miracle on wheels. I mean, how I was able to avoid probably 1,000 cars, and 1,000 cars were able to avoid me on the road, hurtling our metallic husks, the metallic bodies of the vehicles that weigh, a ton and a half, 2 tons each, hurtling through space with velocity and direction, or speed and direction. Somehow we were able to navigate those hundreds of miles. I was able to navigate hundreds of miles yesterday. And, that's an amazing feat of doing. So human beings are amazingly good at thinking and doing. And I'm kind of thinking that that's pretty much all there is. I mean, there's objective reality, sure. But for us as human beings, there's really just thinking and doing. And if as human beings we can get that thinking and doing sort of under control, I think we can live amazing lives. Now, I was thinking about the kinds of thinking that were most highly adaptive. That really is the point of our minds, and that is to adapt to our environments. Our minds strategically and tactically come up with ways to manage our environments and survive in our environments. And that's just what human brains do, right? That's what thinking is all about. Our minds are constantly adapting to our environments, our thought environments, our cultural environments, our social environments. And, the measure of whether this thinking is good or not is whether, our bodies are adapting well to the environments that we're in, that we're continuously placed in, new contexts, new surroundings, new landscapes. So, my guess is that the most adaptive traits that one can have in your thinking revolve around flexibility, revolve around care, right? Safety. The most flexible, safe minds, or flexible, safe thinking, I think, creative. Yeah, the most creative, flexible, safe thought processes will probably be the most adaptable. The ones that engage in the sort of the least risk and make the most of the benefits that one surrounds themselves with, the resources, intelligently sort of being resourced by one's environment. I think there's also something about the best thought processes for living in an environment would be timely. You want to be able to make decisions quickly on the go, using rules of thumb that are time tested, right? Using processes of logic that are sound and valid. And also there's also like the utility of one's thoughts. Too much sort of pie in the sky thinking can be a problem. You want to have sort of a utilitarian nature. You always want to be considering thoughts that might be helpful and helping you adapt to your psychological environments. Spending too much time sort of in fanciful, dreamy world can be a mistake. So you've got to have thoughts that are sort of consistent with reality, that cohere with reality, that adapt to what's true in a flexible way. Always continuously being aware of how useful your thoughts are. If a thought isn't useful, then there ought to be a function in the thinking process that sort of squashes or limits the thoughts that are less useful. So what I'm painting a picture of is sort of a mind that is highly functioning, one that assists the body to adapt to its environment. I mean, how do you know that you're adapting to your environment well? Well, you're finding the resources you need to continue to live, and you're doing so in a way that's smooth, focused, relaxed, peaceful, and effective, efficient, so that you're building not just a sufficient number of resources in time, but you're building like this. You're building up a reserve, right? This is how brains ought to work. How brains ought to work. And I think it's important for us to consider as human beings how brains ought to work. What they're for, right? What their purpose is. Their purpose is for adaptation and enjoyment, protecting resources, developing those resources, and fulfilling one's values and dreams, desires, needs, so long as that they're in accord with the survival of the life of a person's life. They're life-giving actions. So yeah, that's what it's all about. And any thoughts that sort of are disharmonious with those general themes, we need some kind of garbage collection process, which like an apoptosis for ideas that I'll tell you about that ideas that do not work in this scenario. Ideas that are extreme, ideas that are impatient or have no where there is see what ideas that don't work, ideas that are intense, the ideas that bring discomfort in a time of relative peace, ideas that are disturbing. These are ideas that do not work. I think human beings have a tendency to catastrophize. So, really helpful thoughts would be ones that decatastrophize. Yeah. So, that's all about doing. I mean, that's all about thinking. Yeah. The other day, I was thinking about thoughts and helpful thoughts, less helpful thoughts. And I was thinking about social conditioning. And, you know, social conditioning is such a powerful factor in how we sort of frame our thinking. We've got story arcs about, here's one example of social conditioning: the story arc of a human life, right? We're born, we go to school, we get married, we have kids, um, we retire, and then we die. And that's a story arc, a social narrative, right? It's sort of a guide, a general rule of thumb, right, about what goals one is to seek as they go through early life, midlife, and late life. And that that story arc, that narrative can be helpful for some, but not so helpful for others. Like if you're like a quadriplegic or you have some other disability, that story arc may not make a lot of sense to you. You know, particularly if you're like on the autistic spectrum or something like that. That story arc could be a problem. I mean, just knowing the story arc could create a lot of suffering for you. You could suffer quite a bit. Yeah. So I can imagine story arcs like that or social conditioning like that being the source of a lot of pain, emotional pain for some. For others, it just doesn't make any sense. Even if you're like let's say you inherit $1 billion. I mean, is that story arc going to make any sense to you? Probably not. So I think it's important. These generalizations and the social conditioning that we're sort of we're brought up on these stories. I think it's important to sort of balance these stories with your, basically you need to constantly be checking about whether, like, if you're pursuing a certain story arc of your life, a certain narrative, it's important to always to be checking into, whether that narrative is making you happy or not. How many narratives are there about how life ought to work? Well, there is an infinite number, and these narratives can be helpful. These social narratives can be really helpful. They can also cause a lot of suffering, and I think it's important to check in every once in a while with yourself to make sure that the narratives and the values that you are seeking are actually making you happy and making your life easier instead of harder, and helping you be effective in the world, helping you show up in ways that you want to show up. So anyway, that's the thinking part. And then there's the doing part. I already touched on the doing part. Really life is about doing. Thinking is fine. Thinking is sort of like the planning aspect of the doing. In order to do something, you've got to think it first. And here's the thing: human beings are excellent doers. We're amazing doers. We love to do. doing is a big part of what human beings are. One thing that I imagine about the past is that um, people did a lot of doing. 100 years ago, people were doing their laundry and making clothes and gathering food and forming relationships, and there was just a lot of doing. Now today, by contrast, there's a lot less doing. We don't have to do so much. For example, we've got a lot of labor-saving devices, a lot of gadgets that help us out, like refrigerators. We've got um, central heating. We have ovens. We don't need to gather wood. We don't need to gather water. It comes to us into our homes through the utility systems. And in fact, we don't even have to do a lot of original thinking like we might have had to do 100 years ago about how to survive, how to build a home or build a car, build some kind of transportation. Because we got the internet. The internet does a lot of our thinking for us. We have to do less research. I could just ask a question and get an answer almost instantaneously. Like, hey Google, what's the distance between the Earth and the Sun?
Earth is 92.96 million miles from the sun.
So, that's really an excellent example. I have a problem. I want to know what the distance is between the Earth and the Sun. And I could solve that problem almost instantaneously. So I really need to do less work. I need to, and the key word there is do. I need to do less. In order to find that answer, even just 10 years ago, I would have had to do something. And now there's really no need to do a whole heck of a lot. I don't have to grow my own food. Machines grow my food for me, and farmers do that. Farmers control those machines. So I think what's happening is that there's a lot more thinking now, and there's less doing than there ever has been before. And in some respects, that's wonderful, but in some respects, it's not so great. It's actually quite easy to adapt to our environment today. All I have to do is go to work or go to the gym and keep my place relatively clean and healthy, and I can live a long life. It's not rocket science. So in a way, we're sort of, all of us are privileged to live in the world that we live in today. And our brain, of course, is continually trying to adapt to our environment. And the environment that our brains are adapting to is one of ease, right? It's one of ease. So that's wonderful. We get injured less. And I don't know. There's less need to doing, for constantly doing. So I don't know. I don't know what my point is here, but this whole contrast of thinking and doing, I really think that that's pretty much all there is to life. It's just thinking and doing. And so long as you can continue to have thoughts that are valid and useful, and so long as you do things that give you pleasure and enjoyment, you'll do okay, and help you gain benefits in the future. Help satisfy your long-term self-interest. I think you'll be fine. I was thinking today, or maybe it was yesterday. I've actually been thinking over the past couple of days about religion in general and also philosophy in general, and how, and even economics and politics in general. In fact, even values in general, the values that we all strive to meet and live our lives by. And I've really been struck by the idea that because of social conditioning, what all these values are anyway are what I like to call book clubs. Each religion is its own book club. Each political orientation is its own book club, right? Each economic position has its own book club, right? With influential authors and explanations and sets of values with their relative importance. And in fact, anyone who has any set of values that is somewhat organized, even those who have values that are disorganized, is sort of operating as a kind of book club. Now, what is a book club? Book club is a group of people who are in general agreement about what they're reading and opinions about what they're reading. Maybe they'll share certain values about what's important or not. And essentially, these are just people getting together and creating agreements, right? Like, oh, this is true, and that's true, and this is true. This is how I want to live my life. This is how it's actually sort of how purpose and meaning are created through these book clubs, right? We sort of ascertain what our external reality is about, and we do our best to decide on the sets of values that will help us and our offspring, in the survive into the future. And these book clubs are amazing and extremely useful, and really you can't help but be a part of one. But my thought is really just these book clubs are book clubs, right? They're just sort of human beings having conversations and making agreements about what their external reality is like and how best to function in them. And also, ultimately, they're subjective, right? These values are subjective, and human beings are just doing their best to understand the values and live their lives according to those values. And I think it's important to recognize that every set of values just is a kind of book club. Because I think what happens is that people take these values too seriously quite often, and to the extent that they end up injuring themselves or others or engaging in violence, and it's a big problem. I think what happens is these values are sometimes exaggerated. The importance of values are exaggerated. Values, anyway, are just rules of thumb. They're a kind of prediction. They're a kind of scientific theory, right? And they ought to be tested. Reality testing is really important for any kind of theory, including book club theories. And, there's always a tentative nature to them. They're always somewhat, what's the word? Well, they're always kind of invented. And it's always a kind of guesswork about how do we characterize the world that we're in and what kind of behavior optimizes or maximizes our well-being. And we can never know for sure, right? There's an infinite number of perspectives. Each book club is just another perspective. That's what helps make human beings so flexible, is that we can always apply a new book club's perspective. to the situation and get different answers. It's part of how we are creative. And so it makes us such great strategists and tacticians. Anyway, I guess the point I'm making is that it's really important not to, if you want to live life in a way that is always sort of, if you always want to pursue your life, your long-term self-interest, it's really, and pursue your well-being, maximize it. I think it's really important not to take your values too seriously. I've always consider them as hypotheses, always be skeptical of them, because there are people who sort of overbelieve their values and they get themselves in trouble all the time. Happens all the time. All these shootings, right, in the world, really, mass shootings. These are all about people who have taken a thought too far. They're not. The problem is that they are overestimating certainty. They are not sufficiently skeptical about their own thoughts. They're engaged in thinking that's aberrant. And it's kind of funny. The human brain, I'm just thinking about the human experience. The human experience, I think human beings, for some reason, human beings have a tendency to engage in black and white thinking and stereotyping and overgeneralization. And, human beings engage in sloppy thinking all the time. And we do it on a daily basis, on an hourly basis sometimes. I think it's just the nature of the brain. I tend to think of the brain as being an unfinished product. Human brains just aren't perfect. Yeah. Human brains have limitations. And, I think human brains are brought to their limits quite often. Human brains are nothing more than chemistry, right? Molecules, bits of genetic information, RNA, DNA. It's just chemistry that's going on between our ears. Gradients of electrolytes and different concentrations in time and space of all types of chemistry, all types of chemicals, amino acids, essential fatty acids, glucose, things like that, mono, disaccharides, polysaccharides. We're just chemical organisms. And human brains are fallible. That's for sure. Human brains come to wrong conclusions. I think one of the most serious problems is this need for certainty. You see, human beings, our environments are so changing, and really our lives are threatened by nature and its various forces through gravity and electromagnetic force. And, our lives are threatened every day by meteors falling from the sky. There's this great insecurity, where we have less power than we'd like to have. And so that breeds insecurity. And so there is a desire, a strong need, a value for certainty. But what happens, unfortunately, is the uncertainty is premature. This happens in the case of religion all the time. um, People pretend that they're certain that this book, say, is perfect. People pretend that this, let's call it, constitution is perfect. People pretend that this, I don't know, leader is perfect. And it's premature to make those, to make those assumptions. I think people do that because they want certainty in their lives. They want certainty in an insecure world. And so they decide that something is the way it is and it can be no other way. As it's sort of simplistic, really. Fact is, the world is more complex than it's ever been, and it's getting even more and more complex as we go on. So these simple answers, like this book is perfect, or this story is perfect, or this person is perfect, I think they're getting more and more unconvincing all the time. And I'm hopeful that this will mean less violence in the world and more peace. I'm hopeful that the recognition of the complexity of the world will, bring people into more harmony. Human beings have done an amazing job when it comes to the project of civilization. We really have sort of beat the survival problem through the Green Revolution and the Industrial Revolution and the communication age. We've done a great job of sort of maximizing our longevity and survival. And we've done a really good job of minimizing the uncertainty of a life that, human lives just like 200 years ago we were dying like flies, man. I think I heard a story about in the undeveloped world, like half of a family's offspring, half of a couple's offspring would die off before like age 15. Just incredible statistics of death and dying and disease that may even be the case right now. Anyway, human beings really have done a good job keeping themselves alive and exploiting resources like oil and natural gas and solar and hydroelectric. And we've done a really good job. And anyway, I guess I'm rambling. Hopefully my rambling is not too disturbing to you. I am talking about some fairly abstract subjects. This whole thinking versus doing idea. Anyway, I hope you have a fantastic day today. As you can tell, I'm in a somewhat philosophical mood right now. And contemplating minds and bodies and thinking and doing and contemplating social narratives and how we manage all the values that are proposed to us in our minds, how we choose values to gain certainty in an uncertain world. And I tell you, one thing it leaves me is just this whole idea that human beings are extremely courageous. At any moment, our lives can be snuffed out. And yet still we struggle to keep things in order and be virtuous and build our strengths, live our values, in the face of all of this uncertainty and essentially chaos. Human brains can only understand a small portion of what's going on around us. We only have access to 5 senses. And those senses, are limited in their extent, right? We don't have infinite resolution of our eyes, and our brains don't work infinitely well. Anyway, I'm going to wrap it up. Emily, I hope you have a wonderful day today. And I hope you take some time to contemplate the universe and your place in it. I also hope you contemplate different ways to help you uh, optimize your thinking so that you can live your best life. And I want to remind you that it's important not to take the world too seriously. It's important to laugh and to play and have fun, especially today. Um, don't take the news too seriously, and don't take any one philosophical view too seriously. I think having a skeptical mind is really important. And before you take any action that might be self-defeating, I hope that you take some time to reconsider. Sit back, relax, meditate for a while, talk to other people about alternate perspectives, and because I think really that's probably one of the most important things is just try to make sure that you don't engage in any self-sabotage. I've mentioned in the past that I have this agreement with myself never to engage in self-sabotage. And that's always been, I think, a really good agreement that I've made with myself. It's not always easy to know. Sometimes it gets rather ambiguous. Sometimes I don't know what to do. But that's just the nature of being human and living in an uncertain world and having a brain that's less than perfect. Anyway, I hope you have a wonderful day. I hope that you are quite aware that I value you and your opinions and ideas. And I'd like you to know that I love you and that I cherish you and I cherish our relationship together. And, I want you to know that I'm here for as long as I will be alive. I'll be here to appreciate you and acknowledge you, no matter how you decide to show up in the world. I love you, girl. Have a wonderful day. Bye-bye.